Thank you. Daniel chapter 10 is where we left off last Sunday. I would encourage you to have a Bible in front of you, either the Pew Bible or the Bible on your phone, or maybe the Bible that you brought. We're going to be reading some text this morning. At times might be lengthy, depending on how you define lengthy. But looking at the text, we'll want to do that together. As we said, our theme is about the saints, those who are faithful, who endure to the end. Those who are indeed faithful will possess the kingdom, which is an amazing concept, that we will be sharing in the kingdom, and that we will be raised to glory, honor, and everlasting life in the final kingdom. And Daniel, all about Daniel is that hope that motivates faithfulness. We're going to look at some prophecy this morning that its very purpose is to message hope, for Daniel and for the Israelite nation. Our learning objectives: faithfulness, must believe in God's power to save, must believe in God's power to judge those who are in rebellion, and sometimes we talked about that being us. And vindication, God's purpose will in fact be realized, and that that God's people will be vindicated in the eyes of the world. Chapter 7, we're going to revisit chapter 7 this morning. Initially, when we started our study of Daniel, what was the reason we started our study in Daniel chapter 7? What is it out of Daniel chapter 7 that we were supposed to keep in the back of our minds? The throne room. And what does the throne room signify for us as we live our life today and as we study the book of Daniel? God is in control. Yep. And his heavenly promises are still there, and he has everlasting dominion. And we were all encouraged to keep that throne scene in the picture. The fact we started with Daniel chapter 7 is not as much about the four beasts of Daniel chapter 7 than it was making sure that we pull out this throne scene out of Daniel chapter 7. As we read all of the events of the book of Daniel, we need to keep this in the back of our mind. Our study order, we're going to tweak just a little bit. We're going to finish up Daniel chapter 10. We're going to move into Daniel chapter 8, and I'll tell you some of the method to my madness there. but we're going to pull in chapter 12 and talk about chapter 12 right after chapter 11. And as soon as we finish up the visions at the end of the book, we'll go back to Daniel and friends' exile, fiery furnace, and lion's den. Those are all the things that are talked about in the children's classes. So as we look at the entire history or the events of Daniel chapter 7, I'm hoping that seeing that those examples for us and how much we have to learn in Daniel chapter 1, 3, and 6, the new perspective in terms of how all that fits into the timeline and the events that surround the book of Daniel. Our timeline, as I said, we're going to be moving from chapter 10 this morning into chapter 8. When we touch on chapter 8, we're going to touch just a little bit from a reminder perspective on Daniel chapter 7 because they are connected. And that's the vision of the four beasts and that heavenly throne room scene. We left off in Daniel chapter 10. To set the scene here a little bit, I'm just going to read the first verse. In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, so this is telling us that at the time of this vision, what kingdom is ruling? Persia, the Medo-Persians, yeah, Medo-Persians. And it's the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia. If you just quickly go back to Daniel chapter 8, if you have headings in your Bible, it says, in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, and that's Daniel chapter 8. If you go back to Daniel chapter 7, just to keep confusing you, Daniel chapter 7, verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Daniel chapter 7, the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Daniel chapter 10, in the third year of King Cyrus, king of Persia. What's important here is that the vision of chapter 7 occurred under whose rule? Belshazzar of Babylon. In the vision of chapter 10 that we're going to be talking about, it happened in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia. So it says, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel. So this gives us the timing. Who was named Belteshazzar. And the word was true, and it was a great conflict, and he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. That is a synopsis, a summary of the rest of the book. So the vision that's being referred to here in this great conflict is basically chapter 10, verse 2, all the way through the end of the book. So it's basically summarizing what Daniel is about to see in chapter 10, 11, and 12. So that's the premise or the lead up of what we're looking at here. Because if you just read it, it's kind of hard to understand what conflict is he talking about and what vision is he talking about, because he doesn't really start talking about a vision necessarily relative to prophecy, but what he sees in front of him. Verse 2, in those days I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks. Ken can't answer this question, but we talked about last Sunday, why is it that he might be mourning or fasting? What's happening in the with the Israelites, his fellow citizens, so to speak, of the kingdom? What's happening? Are things going well?
Restoration of Jerusalem.
The restoration's not going as they had hoped. There's a lot more resistance than what they had hoped. Ken had another idea that might be the case, but we won't let him comment on that. Verse 4, on the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen, with a belt of fine gold, with Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. The description of this body, this man, is one that is clearly heavenly and of power and of great importance. Verse 7, and I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves. So I was left alone, and I saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. How is Daniel reacting to this vision and what he's seeing? Like it's no big deal.
Seemingly terrified or in great awe of what's happening. He knows, like you said, it's something from heaven, it's spiritual.
Terror and awe is a great description. I think that's exactly how I would describe how Daniel is reacting to this. Verse 9, then I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in deep sleep with my face to the ground. And behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved. Have we heard that before? About Daniel being described that way? A man greatly loved. Understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. Wow. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. Then he said to me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. When do you think, this is not super important, but just to get us to think a little bit, when did that start for Daniel?
He would be in exile.
Okay. Likely at the time that he was being exiled, but it was ultimately put to the test when he arrived where? In Babylon, to start to serve in the king's court. We haven't studied Daniel chapter 1 yet, because I just do things weird. But Daniel chapter 1, in verse 17, and as for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And what we have seen already so far is that has its limits. Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. There was times when he didn't quite understand everything, but he had the ability to understand visions and dreams. We know this because of what we have studied so far in the book of Daniel, as he interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream and then King Belshazzar's dream as well. Verse 12, then he said to me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me. Picture what's happening as this angelic being, this man clothed in all of these elements, exactly as you see on the screen. That's exactly how what Daniel saw. I don't know, maybe. So just picture what this angelic being is describing. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days. For the vision is for days yet to come. So this vision of the things yet to come is what will be revealed in more detail in chapter 11 and chapter 12. And to some extent, he has already been, the visions that Daniel has already received. So what's happening here? So this angelic being is involved in what?
Spiritual warfare.
Yeah, conflict, spiritual warfare, conflict going on, okay? Verse 15, when he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and was mute. So he continues to be in terror and awe. Verse 16, and behold, one in the likeness of the children of man, I believe this is talking about the same person, touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke. I said to him who stood before me, O my Lord, by reason of the vision, pains have come upon me, and I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For now no strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. So Daniel's acknowledging this heavenly being and connected to God. And out of reverence and awe, and perhaps just being in his presence, his strength is being drained. Verse 18, again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, O man, greatly loved. Have we heard that before? Fear not. Peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. And as he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, do you know why I have come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince. I want to kind of jump to the conclusion without spending too much time here. What's happening in parallel with conflict that's going on the earth when it comes to Persia overtaking Babylon, and then ultimately Greece, the kingdom of Greece will overcome the kingdom of Persia. What's happening in parallel in the heavenly places? The battle. So a parallel conflict. In the New Testament, it tells us our true and real battle is where? Spiritual, in the heavenly places, in the realms, right? This is fascinating. And it's supported by what we see in the New Testament as well. So what is about to be described in chapter 11 and chapter 12, I don't understand it all. But to some extent, there's parallel conflicts going on among God's angels and Satan's forces. And beyond that, I don't have any more answers for you. But this is pretty telling evidence, and this is one of the strong evidences that we see in Scripture, that there's these parallel conflicts that are going on in the heavenly places, along with the conflicts that are going on in earth, kind of behind the curtain, right? That's what we're looking at, kind of behind the curtain, what's going on. And then chapter 11 and chapter 12, it starts to then talk about what happens with the Greece Empire and how it gets divided after Alexander the Great dies. We'll get into that in a minute. Do you remember this? Remember this slide? Daniel chapter 7. We're not going to read it or anything. But Daniel's vision of the four beasts. And remember the conclusion that we came to, and how the people that are smarter than me come to the conclusion about what these four beasts represent. And when we first started our study, it kind of seemed like we were just applying these kingdoms to these beasts just because that's what we thought it would be. But there's some rhyme and reason to it relative to the rest of the visions. And there's some specific revelations about the next kingdoms that are happening. So the lion, which nation did we conclude was likely referring to, or what nation was the lion referring to? Babylon. Yep. And then the bear? Persia. Yep. And then the leopard? Greece. And then the beast, the final beast? Rome. Okay. And then all the different horns on the beast likely represent various rulers or emperors in Rome. So we go back to our timeline. Look at what's the number of years between chapter 7 and chapter 8?
Short.
2, 3 years is what we're looking at. What you're seeing on the monitor is the Babylonian Empire really at its largest, extent. This is the empire by which the Lord would judge his people, and that the Israelites would go into exile into Babylon for how many years? 70. When at the end of the 70, what kingdom transitioned to what other kingdom? It went from Babylon to Persia. Cyrus, king of Persia, who conquered Babylon, that was the writing on the wall incident. And at that same time, what was the decree that Cyrus offered to the Jews? To return, they were allowed to return to Jerusalem. Still under Persian rule. And then when that happened, when they were freed from exile and allowed to go back, everything was fine. There was no issues. They were still under an extreme amount of oppression. And this is what the Lord had to communicate to Daniel, that the trials are not over. Yes, your exile is over, but the trials for the nation of Israel is not over. And all of this was to prepare the way for Christ, which I'm hoping as we go to the next 2 or 3 Sundays, we see this transition from the nation of Babylon and how it represents really all nations that don't walk under the pattern of the Lord, and ultimately the end of those nations. And that's true throughout history. But there is a kingdom that lasts forever. And which kingdom is that? God's kingdom. Yeah. And so for those who remain faithful, we will be we'll be possessors of the kingdom along with Christ. And we will, at some extent, rule with him. It's amazing. It's an amazing promise that God has offered to us. Okay, so the Babylonian Empire, 626 to 539. So if you do the math, roughly 200 years that this empire was ruling this part of the world. And now we're going to move to Persia. This is the Persian Empire. This is the kind of culmination of the Persian Empire. And this Persian Empire was and ended up being much larger in terms of its land conquering. And so if we zoom out a little bit, yeah. So this is the extent of the Persian Empire. And they were from 550 BC to 330 BC, roughly 200 years of being an empire. I'm showing you this because of the 4 beasts, right? The Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, just to give you a feel for the expanse of the empires. And Scripture is giving Daniel a vision, a prophecy of these things happening in the future. History, outside the Bible, tells us that these things happened exactly as the Bible described. Are there some details that people question and this and that? Yes. Generally speaking, though, this is exactly what happened in history. And I hope that's faith affirming for you, because it is for me. So that's the Persian Empire. And that ended, the Persian Empire officially ended when Alexander the Great, he was Greek, from the Macedonia area, and he conquered Persia. And if we look at the Greece Empire of Alexander the Great, 336 to 323. What strikes you about this empire as compared to the other two we just talked about? Short. 12, 13 years. Ironically, as far as I'm concerned, was Alexander the Great died in Babylon. And he died of health reasons, as the record will the record will show in history that he died of some sort of disease in Babylon. He was 32 years old. So he has always been kind of the model by which all military campaigns since then have been measured relative to his success as a military leader, which is fascinating. Very, very fascinating. There's a lot of detail around how he did that. His techniques are all recorded, and all of that is embedded into history, and something that from a military command perspective is always reflected on when decisions are made in military battles. And then when Alexander the Great dies in June of 323, his kingdom gets split among his generals. And that activity of the empire of Greece being split into his 4 generals, and the war that goes on, almost a civil war that goes on among his generals as they vie for power and position. You know, I'm better than you, I'm more powerful than you, all of this. All of that is what chapter 11 is all about. And the detail of that, I mentioned this last Sunday, the detail of that is so aligned so much with history. This is what drives some scholars to suggest that there's no way that much accuracy could be in a prophecy. So much so that they question the writing, the time of the writing. Like Daniel chapter 11 must have been written after these events happened. Faith affirming from my perspective. So Greece, 323 to 31, so roughly 300 years. Greece was in control of this area of the world. And ever since then, this Western Greek philosophies, influence, all of that influences us even today. So the Western Greek influence, when we talk about that, and Hellenistic Greek thinking and Greek way of, culture of Greek and so forth, Hellenistic, we see that in the New Testament. All of that is a continuation, and we hear and see Hellenistic Jews and that kind of thing, and that came from this Greek empire and the influence that this Greek empire had. And some of the terrible things that happened in the Israelite nation was because of how much passion these generals had to change the cultures that were around them and make them a Greek culture. And that's where the Maccabean revolt comes in, where they said enough is enough. We're not going to offer sacrifices to pagan gods, and there was a revolt. And that's the Maccabean revolt. And that's the one that happened between the Testaments. In chapter 11, we're going to read about the kings of the north and the kings of the south. You see the red line when we read chapter 11, the kings of the south and the kings of the north. This is really kind of the dividing line, and the primary battles that we're going to read about in Daniel chapter 11 occurred between the kings of the north and the kings of the south. The Seleucus or Seleucid general, there was a lot of fighting with the Ptolemy in Egypt. So it's kind of a Syrian dynasty and an Egyptian dynasty. And that Greek culture is being embedded into these areas of the world. And we still see that. We see residuals of the Greek influence in these parts of the world. But when we read about kings of the north and kings of the south, and you think, oh, what is that? I don't know what that is. Make it simple. It's really a culmination of all the kings of the north above the red line, and the kings of the south is primarily the Egyptian, which is a very strong empire. Lots of resources in Egypt made them very strong. So kings of the north, kings of the south, constantly fighting, as I said, almost a civil war. What I want us to note, this is very important. What I want us to note, look at the red line. Where does that red line go right through the middle of? Israel. Do you think that the kingdom of Israel would be impacted by these historical events? A lot of the battles that happened between these kings happened right in that red line area. Maybe a little bit north of that, maybe a little bit south of that, but there was a lot of it, which means that the God's nation, the Israelites, would be impacted by world history. And this is what is, again, will be described in detail in chapter 11. We got one more. The Western Roman Empire. From 27 BC to 476 AD. This would have been roughly similar to what Jesus would have experienced as a Roman Empire. And Rome took over Greece, the Greece Empire, in roughly 27 BC. So as Jesus comes onto the scene, the Roman Empire would have been in full control of that area for roughly 50 years. They would have been in control of it. But again, a lot of Greek culture and so forth would have been embedded into the countries, especially the countries that you see in the middle of the map, and then the southeast and northeast, lots of Greek influence in those areas of the world. And of course, you can see Jerusalem and Judea, all of that being caught up in the Roman Empire, the Roman rule. And we see all that, right, in the New Testament. And then ultimately, Revelation is going to be talking about the impact the Roman Empire had on the New Testament Christians. Not just, as we transition from the Old Testament and the Israelite nation, we transition into the book of Revelation, which is similar to these Daniel prophecies relative to the church in the New Testament, and how the church in the New Testament would be persecuted and oppressed, just like the children of Israel. Questions? Yes.
Another question about the empire, but going back to the vision of the man, do you believe that was Jesus? Because there's some ideas that, since in the New Testament it's stated that Jesus is the intercessor between man and God, that actually every occurrence of deity speaking to God in the Old Testament is actually Jesus and not God. Like the burning bush.
Mm-hmm.
Put forth the idea that even though it uses God, but it's actually Jesus because he's the intercessor between man and God.
Great question. Henley's listening. That's awesome. I don't think it is. And the reason I don't think it is, and if you think it is, I don't think it really matters. But the reason that I don't think it is because this man is speaking and putting himself on an even plane to Michael. So from my perspective, I don't think it is for that reason, but it could be. Certainly could be. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, another lesson I can see in this history is division causes destruction. It happened with Israel, right? The dividing of the kingdom and whatever. And Paul in Ephesians 4 talked about unity of faith, and how important unity is, the things that cause division. That's not what God had wanted. He just wants people to be unified.
Yeah, that's one of the I think the reasons why the Roman Empire lasted as long as it did is because there was unification, but ultimately nations will divide. Yeah, and civil wars will happen, and division. What we know, division in the church causes great harm, and people fall away because of those divisions, and for little things from what time services start to what color the grape juice needs to be, and all that kind of stuff. It's tough. I come back to this slide because, again, as a reminder, oppression and persecution from the Babylons is limited and will come and go. Quote, quote, Babylons, right? Quote, quote, Babylons. You can put quote, quote, Persia in there, quote, quote, Greece, quote, quote, Rome, quote, quote, whatever nation comes after that. Oppression and persecution will come. It's limited. It will come and go, but the beast will ultimately be tamed and then destroyed by God for the saints to possess the kingdom. Again, our timeline. Let's look at chapter 8. Let's begin reading chapter 8 in the remaining time we have.
Kurt?
Yes.
Do you think that could also apply to other religions in today's vernacular, where back then it was more, those things were unified as like Rome or Greece as one? We look at it today that who are Christians being persecuted in other places are not so much from a government as much as they are from those who are following a different type of religion. And I think they're the same thing as far as how this scripture can be applied. It's not just that this government is going to be what persecutes you, it's going to be those people.
I think the application can certainly apply. Yeah, I appreciate the thinking because it brings it home for us. I love that application. Absolutely. Well said. Daniel chapter 8. So Daniel chapter 7 again, the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Chapter 8, in the third year of reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me. So if we go back to our timeline, is the Medo-Persian dynasty happening anytime soon? Depends on how you define soon, but it certainly wasn't around the corner. And this revelation, this prophecy about Persia rule is connected to Daniel chapter 8. Okay. Daniel chapter 8, verse 1. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the capital, which is in the province of Elam. The Persians have their start. The foundation of the nation of Persia is in that very area. A little bit south, a little bit southeast. That's where the nation, the seed of the nation or the dynasty or the empire of Persia had its beginning. So isn't it ironic that Daniel's not in Babylon, he's in Susa, and that's about 200 miles or so between them. Don't really know why he's there. He may be there as a part of the vision. It's not really clear to me personally if that's the case, which one is the case. But regardless, it's a little ironic to me that he's going to be talking about that in Susa where he is, and it's basically the seed of the kingdom where it started, where Persia started. So I think that's interesting. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the banks of the canal. It had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. Wow. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and struck the ram and broke his two horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great, even to the host of heaven. And some of the hosts and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it, together with the regular burnt offering, because of transgression. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot?" And he said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." So Brother Henley, right there in verse 13, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, there's, in my mind, a possibility that one of those is the, personification of Christ, in my mind. Verse 15, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, "Gabriel, make this man understand the vision." So he came near where I stood. And when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, "Understand, O son of man, that the vision is for the time of the end." And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand up. He said, "Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia." And that was yet to come. That's not what's happening when this vision is being given to Daniel. And the goat is the king of Greece. And that would have been completely, that would be unknown that would be happening. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn, who would be the great horn? Alexander the Great. Interesting that it's called a great horn. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. And for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall rise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that have been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I arose and did nothing. Then I arose and went about the king's business. But I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. I believe he understood the vision itself, but not necessarily how to interpret these things. And what would this mean for God's people? What kind of oppression are we talking about? A lot of open questions that Daniel would have likely had. So when he says he doesn't understand it, I wouldn't conclude that he understood nothing about it, but he didn't understand it completely. In terms of what that meant, especially for God's people. So as we look at the image on the screen, we have the ram that is signifying the nation of Persia and the nation of Greece. So Daniel's being notified or being told, or he's getting revelation about what's going to happen relative to God's people and how God's people is going to be wrapped up in this world history. And a lot of what we see is exactly how things transpired in world history. So this is the back-to-back of Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8. And again, what I'm trying to hope you see kind of the method of the madness is as we start to talk about these kingdoms, Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. You have that right? Daniel chapter 2, is that right? Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapters 10 through 12 are all talking about these kingdoms that would be coming that would continue to oppress God's people. And ultimately, this prophecy that started to touch Rome would also touch God's people in the church, in the new kingdom. So when we are oppressed, when we suffer for the name of Christ, we shouldn't be surprised, because this is how history has validated that these things have happened and continue to happen. Yeah, Ed?
I haven't been able to be in a lot of the classes. I've been watching a lot of them when I was out of town. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I watched the one twice. But you started everything kind of in Daniel 5, where God is in control. He's behind the scene. He's pulling, the strings, or what God is in control. And the thing is I taught this about 30 years ago, and during this part of the class, I pounded my brain for 3-4 months, and I could prove where, Cleopatra and Mark Antony's in these next few chapters and stuff like that. It was so intriguing, and to learn all about this history, and I had these history books, and I was studying this stuff, and then, all these dates and times and history, but you know what? What's the bottom line in this book is God is in control. And I think that's one thing that happens in the world today. And sometimes with Christians, we get wrapped up in the dates and the times and some of these, nuances. And who is in control?
Yeah.
Who's ultimately in charge?
Yeah. The saints will possess the kingdom. In the meantime, we have to know God's in control, and there are battles going on behind the curtain that's happening and occurring on our behalf as we have our own struggles, our own oppression, and we're not left here alone to fight the battle alone. Things are going on behind the curtain, and we have to believe that, and that's a part of God being in control, that he's just not, up there doing nothing. He's setting us up, setting world history up for us to possess the kingdom. As always, thank you for your kind attention.